With a dust storm raging around us, welcome you back to JLF's Brave New World. On behalf of Festival Directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, a warm welcome. Those of you who missed our earlier sessions, including the outstanding ones with Piku Iyer, Peter Carey, Jhumpa Lahiri, Siddharth Mukherjee, Chinmay Tumbe, and so many others, you may catch them on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. To tell you more about the stellar list of writers we have lined up on you, please welcome Festival Directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple.
Dear friends of literature, friends of JLF, we are delighted at the response from all of you to our first digital session some days ago. And we return again today with more programming which looks at the world around us, the brave new world we are trying to understand and to access. Do tune in, do link in, do engage, do comment as we celebrate books, dialogues, and literature.
Hello, my name is William Dalrymple. I'm one of the co-directors of the Jaipur Literature Festival, and I'm here to encourage you to turn on for Brave New World. This is the Jaipur in Exile online digital festival. We have an extraordinary array of writers. There are not many positive things coming out of this terrible pandemic, but one one positive thing is that all the writers we've ever wanted at Jaipur, who for one reason or another weren't able to make it so far, have all said yes. And we have writers such as Robert Macfarlane, Peter Carey, Alain de Botton, Emma Duval, writers we have longed to bring to you before, who've been too busy or unable to make the journey, who are now going to make it digitally online to a screen near you. So lock down, log in, and join us, please, for Brave New World.
Thank you, Namita. Thank you, William. Our first session today on JLF Brave New World is Walls and Bridges, a session on dystopian fiction and its disturbing emergence in reality. Prayaag Akbar speaks about his chilling novel, Layla, with journalist Nandini Nair. Prayaag Akbar is the author of Layla, which won the Crossword Jury Prize and the Tata Literature Live First Book Award. The novel was turned into a series by Netflix. He is a senior fellow at KREA University. Nandini Nair is the literary and cultural editor of Open magazine. She has worked as a writer and commissioning editor in the features section of the Indian Express and the Hindu. She writes on social and cultural issues. Ladies and gentlemen, please do comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment and question section. And our speakers will be happy to take your questions at the end of the session. To also follow our handles JLF Litfest on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get notified on the upcoming sessions. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, and we know that that's the biggest problem today, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, or of course, you can catch up with us anytime on our Facebook page. Ladies and gentlemen, Prayaag Akbar and Nandini Nair in Walls and Bridges.
Thank you so much, Sanjoy. Prayaag, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm going to start with a contradiction. I know Sanjoy introduced your book as dystopian fiction, but I would like to say that Layla is actually a love story. It's a love story between a mother and a child. And it's a story about a child being taken away from a mother in horrible circumstances and the mother embarking on a search. And I think the book especially speaks to our time because it is so relatable. It's about a world in which we're struggling for clean air, clean water. It's something that anyone in any metropolitan in India totally and completely identifies with. I know you were a journalist and you still write nonfiction. I want to start by asking you, what made you write this book? And do you like the term dystopian?
Okay. First of all, thank you for that really lovely introduction, Nandini and Sanjoy. And thank you for reading my book with so much attention and so much care, because really that's actually what I set out to do. When I started writing it, I wasn't thinking in terms of creating a dystopia or writing a dystopian fiction. The very heart of the book for me was this relationship between Shalini and Layla, the mother and the daughter relationship, and Shalini's love for her husband Riz, was a very central element to me. I identified with both, the characters over there. And I think, for me, that because that was the center of the book, because that was the focus of the book, I didn't really, I didn't end up, I wanted to keep that emotional core, because for me, that is a beautiful part of fiction. In fiction, you can really explore, you can go down into the depths of one person's, very soul almost. And that's what I was trying to write about. And her separation from her daughter becomes a kind of, a trigger for her journey into this world. As this world is descending into a dystopia, let's say. I'm not actually very fond of the term myself, as I think you might know, because when the book came out in 2017, it was out. I remember doing a couple of sessions and telling people, I was like, I don't like this term dystopia, because I feel like we are, the term automatically distances you from from imagining that these are realities that are happening around us. It's like it's an inversion of utopia. So obviously, when you imagine a dystopia, you think of it as this faraway place. Oh, it's never actually going to happen to us. No one is actually going to. People who read Fahrenheit 451 would be like, oh, no one actually goes out and burns books and has fire hoses and they try and burn books with fire. And the truth is that book burning has been going on in cultures for hundreds of years. People are afraid of knowledge, people are afraid of ideas, and they attack ideas. And book burning or its equivalents in other societies have been going on. So, I think the term dystopia automatically places a kind of distance which gives us a sense of safety. We're like, oh, this could never happen to our world. And honestly, as we're seeing around us, look at all of us today. Look at how we're living today. Is that these are things that would have been unimaginable 2 months ago for all of us to be doing this. I was just telling you that yesterday I did some work for my university, for Kriya University. I was doing that via Zoom. It's like students from all over in the country. So it's obviously there are elements of great change happening around us, technological change and biological change. We're seeing this, and it's changing our lives very dramatically. So these are things that we have to pay close attention to.
We talk about technological changes, and I think in Leila especially, tech is a form of surveillance, and I think it comes out very clearly in the book. And especially right now, we're seeing that more and more, right? There'll be an app if you're in quarantine, which will tell the government whether you've left your house or not, which might have its good side, but it's also the possibilities and the things that can go wrong are immense. So how do you see tech being used, especially since you've written so much about it in the book?
Thank you. I mean, again, great question. I do think that that's something we really need to worry about in this post-COVID world. If you read, the sort of one of the great thinkers of our time, Yuval Harari, he's been going on about this now since COVID sort of really took over, took over our lives and took over the world. He has been writing, he wrote a lovely piece in the FT. He's actually been writing about it for a while. And he feels that surveillance is the big, big threat now. And so, I mean, if you think about, okay, sorry, I want to dial back a little bit here. Yeah. Let's think about, first of all, this, the name for this festival we're at, JLF, right? It's called The Brave New World. And of course, that's a beautiful book. Aldous Huxley's book is fantastic. It was one of the original dystopias, I think. I mean, not original, but it was definitely up there amongst the best.
The landmark dystopias.
Yeah, it's a landmark dystopia, exactly. And Huxley's book is fantastic. But I was just wondering about this just an hour or two ago. I was just thinking about the title, and I was like, is this a brave new world, or is this a scared new world? Are we frightened? We're all in our homes. We're all cloistered, and we're desperate to protect the people who are close to us, our families, our friends, whatever it is. Keep from spreading this infection. Keep from creating this ruinous impact on society and the economy and all of that. And so it is. It's in a sense, it's a kind of fear, right, that we all feel. But within that fear, and I think it's very natural. We shouldn't be. There's nothing to be ashamed of, or there's nothing to be. That I'm scared of this, or I'm worried about this disease. I mean, I think it's perfectly natural for people to be worried about it. But what you also get when there is this kind of societal fear or this widespread fear is governments respond to that. And how do states respond to these moments of fear? I think people have been comparing this crisis with the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918 or whatever, but the world is so different now. And if you think, and for me, this is politically it's cataclysmic. Maybe COVID is this what we're going through is kind of a cataclysm, and it's comparable perhaps to 9/11. 2001, when that happened, it transformed the political world. It transformed how we saw politics, how we saw the role of the state, and if you think about America in the year 2000 or 1999, was there was no question. If a government told you that we were going to, in 1999, if the president of the US said, I want to monitor all your phone calls, I want to make sure everyone's data is tracked, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be able to arrest someone. I'm going to be able to, Homeland Security, Patriot Act, all of that. I'm going to be able to come into your house and arrest you without a warrant. No American would have accepted it. Not one. They would have considered this a violation of all their fundamental basic rights. But once you have this specter of, at that time in 2001, it was the specter of terrorism, right? So you had this thing of Islamic terror, global terror, or whatever it is. And so once you have that specter, governments, how they respond to it is by ramping up their own, their surveillance. They ramp up how they can monitor our lives closer and closer. And someone like Yuval Harari, in his piece, I mean, he frightened he really frightened me, because when I was reading that, because he says that now, because apparently they've started doing this in China in a more limited way, but like you'll have like under the skin surveillance. So they're going to be able to tell how your heart responds to some, because of these, they're going to have these monitors that will ostensibly to check you for COVID or some equivalent disease or something that's coming up in the future. These posts of surveillance posts then are able to, they track your inner health data. They track all your data. So everything that you produce, all your emotions. So until now, and so that becomes data that can be then sold to capitalists and to big companies. Right. And so now, until now, you had, if someone you could force me to watch a movie, right? You could make me sit down and watch a movie or read a book, and like a government could, but they couldn't tell what I was feeling inside. If it made me angry, there's something that, say, I'm watching a movie about, whatever, like a documentary about Arvind Kejriwal, and I don't like the way they're saying it. The government would not be able to tell if I was a fan of Kejriwal's or not, just by the fact of me sitting there. But now they can tell. I mean, they will be able to tell in the post-COVID world, or if they ramp up surveillance to this degree, they will be able to tell if I'm a fan of Kejriwal's or not, or if I'm a fan of a particular politician or not. And that's frightening. That is a level of control and surveillance that already we check ourselves when we want to say something on Twitter, or we want to say something, and you're like, who needs that? Who needs this, like this big backlash and people talking, all of that, and people tweeting at you and all. But imagine if states were able to tell immediately, instinctively. It's very, very. I think what COVID is going to do is transforming how we live, but it's also transforming. It's going to have these transformations in society in terms of how governments treat us. Are we carriers of disease automatically, or do we need to be infected first? That's the question.
And I think the institution that benefits most from fear is the government, right? So if they make you scared, then they can do whatever they want. And I think we're kind of seeing that again, right? Like you mentioned, the government can tell you to bang a thali, but it's also, in a way, it's another form of control. I think fear is the most easily manipulatable way, because it makes you irrational. It makes you
perfect, yeah,
and it makes you unscientific. And I think that's what we're seeing in some ways.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the thali thing was a great example. I do think Modi has taken some good steps and some bad steps, but I think the messaging had to be clearer there. He had to let people know what exactly the threat was. I mean, I live in a very small village in a small state, and I remember going on a walk outside before the first 5 o'clock thing, and there's this old lady who lives across from us, and she's always out in the garden, and she was like, "Yeah, don't bring your son out at this time. He's very young. He's almost 2, and it's like, don't bring your son out. Modi's going to be spreading, like he's going to fire something from a satellite, and he's going to cure us all of this thing."
Right.
And of course, she was an older lady, and I don't know, but it was frightening. It was for me, it was kind of shocking that you didn't actually explain the problem and explain, like lay it out there, and uh, instead of sort of giving a diktat about what you should be doing at a certain point of time, make sure people understand the problem.
Right. You mentioned that you're in Goa and you're in a little tiny village. Leela is a very, it's a very city book, right? And I think your discomfort with the Indian metropolis, I think, comes out very well. It's visceral, literally. So can we talk a little bit about that? What do cities mean to you, and why have you chosen to leave, actually?
Well, it is. I think it was a kind of discomfort. You're right. I maybe perhaps didn't acknowledge it at the time, but it was. I grew up in Delhi, and I spent a big part of my 20s and early 30s in Bombay. So I was, I think both those kind of fed into the book in different ways. Both those cities, which are two major sort of metropolises, fed into the book. And I realized I was seeing, in Delhi, it became the colonies, how strong the RWAs are. And again, we're seeing that, right? In this time of fear, suddenly the RWAs become so, you're like, people are, they become so powerful.
They're like the Kap Panchayat, literally.
Yeah, they're like, exactly. That's a great example. That's a great analogy. It's like, they're so powerful, and they're like banning people from going here and there. And a friend of mine in Delhi was telling me, my agent actually, she was telling me her well, I don't want to get her in trouble, but like her RWA was, it was like, no, they were sending out long SMSs. Nobody's allowed to go outside, and no one's allowed to do this. And it's. I'm glad. I mean, we
have to download this app.
So yeah, and today I read in Bombay there was someone who they showed up at someone's house, an older lady's house who'd never traveled abroad. I mean, no travel history. No one in her immediate network had traveled recently, and because they came and they were like, they put her in quarantine in Bombay and put her with her husband, and she's like, I don't have any symptoms, and the whole building came out and were like, she's not gone anywhere, she never leaves the building. And she downloaded the app. Her explanation for this was that I've downloaded the app, and they think that so it's very strange. This is a story in Midday, which I read it just a few hours ago.
Right.
And so you don't want to download an app and then they think you're like you're carrying this. Everything is, because there's so much confusion at this moment. No one knows what's going to happen from day to day almost. So I think it's better to take things in a very small and incremental way.
But sorry, going back to the question, so you don't like Delhi and Bombay?
I do. I mean, I like it very much. I have many fond memories and many great friends in both these cities. I actually love both the cities, and I've always thought of myself as a city boy.
Right.
Oh, guy, but I'm very happy here. It's beautiful. You get to go on walks in the evening.
So what is life like over there?
Goa, it's very quiet. I get to write a lot. I start writing early in the morning, and we have a very young son, so he loves it. He gets to run around. I think we were living in Bombay in a very small apartment, and suddenly after he was born, like the apartment that was kind of perfect for the both of us, my wife and I, for many years. Suddenly it seemed to shrink. All his stuff and his toys and his bed and everything was like. Suddenly I was like, oh my God, we need. And yeah, so we just decided to upsticks.
Right. So how long has it been there?
Just about a year.
Okay. But you're finding these sylvan surroundings are good for your writing as well. So you don't only need the.
Oh no! I mean, so my writing isn't. I was worried about that actually. I was worried that that I would lose some kind of edge in my writing. That I was stepping back from the things, because a lot of in Laila, a lot of the things that people really found real, and that people came to me after the book and wrote to me, were sort of descriptions of the metropolis, of things that I'd seen and things that I'd observed and witnessed, or the way we interact with each other, the way we interact with the economic underclass. And so when people would write to me, and so I was worried that, like, in my next book, hopefully whenever I get it done, I won't have that edge. But what I found is, I mean, first of all, you don't lose your anger. You still feel passionately about things, and hopefully this beautiful place enters my book in a different way, and
Right.
the book won't be so dark. I'm hoping.
You mentioned class briefly, and I want to talk a bit about that because I think Leila does an excellent job of sort of bringing that up. And I think the entire pandemic is sort of highlighting our class divide even more. So I want to talk about the pandemic in class, but also I think in your book, it's a lot about our domestic services in us, right? And how that it's a very complicated relationship because they know our lives entirely, like what we wear, what we eat, what we drink, and we know nothing about theirs.
It's very...
And I was in fact reading this interview with Tilotma Shom, and I think she's just recently been in this movie called Sir, and it's about domestic help falling for the boss, or the boss falling for her. I haven't watched it. And she said this really interesting thing. She said that she was trying to Google, sort of master and servant relationships. And, she just thought there'll be stories or there'll be journalism reports, etc. And she said that the only thing she found was pornography.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question? Sorry, what did she find?
So, yeah, so she was trying to find stories of, like help and their employers falling in love, because it could happen, right? It's not out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And she said the only thing she found was pornography. And, and she said that was just such an eye-opener because, like, even our imagination does not allow us to consider that relationship as an equal ever. And I found that quite an interesting insight, actually. And I think in your book as well, because it kind of the help and the employer, it's a very complicated dynamics, and I think you do it really well. So I just want to talk a bit about that. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think the way I addressed that particular thing was by showing Shalini at one point gets a little peeved,
right.
That she thinks that her husband is looking at Sapna, but then there's that sense of social superiority that she feels, and she feels like, oh, my husband would never, go down that path, whatever it is. But Tilotma was right about that in this, because I read an article years ago in Hindustan Times or something that it's actually the most searched for category in Indian, on Indian, like Pornhub or whatever.
Right.
It's because I think it speaks to one, the male need for dominance within the sexual dynamic, and secondly, there's a sense of I'm automatically I can be dominant automatically. I don't need to actually woo this person or give her or to be nice to her or anything. I have this right. It's a lord and vassal kind of relationship. It's kind of medieval in that sense. But if you have someone coming into your home and sweeping the floor, that's kind of medieval too, right? That's not to say that I don't. And of course, this that's one of the interesting things about COVID is that now we're all kind of trapped in and doing our own housework, and that's very unusual for India, right? For the class in India, suddenly to have all this housework to do, and
especially the Indian male.
Especially for the Indian male. I mean, I'm as cultural as anyone. I wrote a book, but that doesn't make any different from any other male, Indian male. So, I mean, I think it's a good learning experience. I think for a lot of us, I've grown fonder of it as more I do it.
Like, I think you have this really good scene in the book in which Shalini is discomforted when Sapna kisses the child. That's this entire thing, right? Like, you can leave your child to be taken care of, but then there are certain boundaries, because then you're imagining, oh, her saliva might be on my child, and am I okay with that? And no, I'm not okay with that. And I think reading it makes one really uncomfortable, because you kind of realize your own prejudices, your own misconceived notions in a way. And I think that's what the book kind of makes you aware of, which is great.
Thank you. I mean, that was a scene I really worked on. That was because it's actually something I had heard in a friend's house. Lovely, the aunties. I've known her for all my life, growing up, all of that. But she said it once. She said it to my friend about his daughter. And it was like, are you gonna let the maid kiss? And I was like, oh my God, like, auntie, like, how are you doing this? Like, how are you saying something like that? Because and I think what it speaks to also is, if you look at the the theoretical studies on caste, saliva is a big part of was always seen as a contaminating agent. So I think that's kind of embedded in our psyche, in the Indian psyche, this idea of jhuta, the idea of jhuta, which you hear all the time, oh, jhuta nahi pina, don't have this and all that. And I was in college. I was lucky to go to college in America as an undergraduate. And I remember over there, like, no one cares about jhuta. Like, people are just, picking up bottles and drinking. Like, no one. And I remember, I mean, it's not that I cared too much about it as a child, but I just remember people, because they had no conception of it, it never seemed like an unclean thing to, like, someone who's had a sip from a bottle of water, someone else can have a sip. It's not, it's not the end of the world. I mean, they're not sharing bottles willy-nilly, but, like, if you know someone, it's okay. But in India, it's like, oh my God. And it has something to do with caste,
Right.
It has something to do with the walls that we sort of erect around ourselves.
And I think the frightening thing is how coronavirus is actually going to make all this worse, right? Because this idea of dirt, this idea of contagion, this idea of, keeping the outsider out, because the outsider is the one that's going to bring you disease and maybe even death. And I think these are sort of divisions that, if one was hoping one was going to move away from, I think they're just sort of going to become worse in time to come, right?
Definitely. I mean, I think you're quite right to bring that up, because this is the coronavirus is definitely a rich man's disease. This was something that it's an airplane import. It came in from abroad. This was international travelers who were carrying this into India. But almost immediately it became, the people being vilified. The imagery became migrant workers moving here, poor Muslim, Tablighi Jamaat, or it was minorities. It was the underclass, economic underclass, migrants, the poor. Our media sometimes can just play the most horrifying role, but I'm thinking more of TV journalism now, but, like, this kind of really, they beat these drums, they just get something idea in their head and then start beating this drum. And I think we're going to see a lot of targeting of poorer people because of this idea. In Defense Colony very recently, there was a family that was they was tested positive.
Right.
I think 2 or 3 people in the family tested positive, and it became a big thing. I have a lot of friends I'm from Delhi. A lot of friends in that area who grew up there, and they I was on a network, our WhatsApp or whatever. People were putting on these posts. People are worried. And my friends have children, very young children. I understand, like, it's completely understandable, and so people are worried and posting this and like talking to each other and. There was, because the SHO of the place had put up this, the station house of the policeman in charge or someone had sent out this long message saying, yeah, and these guys have all been tested and they're positive, and they have this guard and with a Muslim name, and we suspect he went to the Tablighi Jamaat and that, and he used to come in and out of the house and he's on the run. And so for 3 or 4 days, there was this kind of furor. There was people who were very angry, and people I'm very fond of, my friends. They were nervous and upset, and there was a lot. It kind of pushes people in disease, pushes people into this, this kind of mental space where you're so threatened by the outside world that you have to guard yourself in any way possible. And if that means being politically incorrect, then why not? I'll be politically incorrect. Means that I can protect my child. And I understand that impulse, but it turned out that guard was not positive. Someone in that family had traveled abroad.
Exactly.
I remember for 3 days, everyone in that group was insisting, and I was trying to argue, and then I just sort of gave up because it seemed overwhelming, the evidence. And the fact of the matter is, even if that man had infected this family, he's not to blame. Disease, something like this is not, it's not punitive. You can't start attacking the person,
Right.
whoever it is, Hindu, Muslim, whatever it is. You can't start attacking a person because they have this. Susan Sontag has written very beautifully about this. Like, disease is not, disease becomes, the disease itself is obviously, it's seen as reprehensible, but the person who holds the disease,
Right.
the repository of the, is the person who's always, attacked, and that's the person who's blamed. It's never the disease almost. The disease is obviously seen as bad, but it's the person, because that's the person bringing it to us.
And I found in that entire defense colony guard story, which even I was following, how no one was saying you're not supposed to have a guard coming in at this time, right? Like, why is this poor man working? You should, like, you give him a mask, you give him gloves, and tell him to stay at home, right? Like,
that was the thing. That was, and the policeman, that in that message is like, a lot of families are doing this, a lot of, and as if, this was the first rule they said: don't let people into your home. And I don't want to attack that family either, like whatever choices they made, and their own prophecy is really suffering right now. So it's very tough for them. But
Right.
it's this kind of thing where actually we need to broaden our empathy as much as possible. We need, as human beings at this time, we need to broaden ourselves. We need to really give as much as we can give as much sympathy and empathy to everyone that we can. But instead, we become like, the natural human instinct is to become cussed and to start looking to protect only what's your own, and
Right.
I think that's a very, very dangerous instinct. It's probably natural, but it has these very deleterious, debilitating effects.
Harmful, right? We're just going to be moving to audience questions shortly, but before that, I want to do a quick rapid fire. So if you're game for that.
Okay.
So yeah, let's hopefully our audience is going to like this. That's the truth serum. Okay, great. 40th birthday.
What about it? Oh, well, 3 years away.
Okay.
How are you doing? 3 years away. That's what I thought.
Margaret Atwood.
Fantastic writer.
Coetzee.
Sorry?
Coetzee.
Oh, he's my hero. I have a portrait of him. Hero. He's my true hero.
Okay, and why?
I loved his book. I mean, I've loved everything pretty much that he's written. I remember when I read Waiting for Barbarians. That was my first one. And it just, like, at the first page, it just shook me. Everything. I had to keep rereading the first page because I was like, who's this writer? I'd never heard of him. My brother-in-law, I mean, I think he was dating my sister then. They hadn't got married. But he just handed me this book. He's like, read this guy. He's very good. And I was like, what? I'd never heard of him. And almost, I think I'd heard of him, but, I didn't know what kind of writer he was. And I started reading it. I was just blown away.
Right. Debut book.
Laila?
Okay. Second book.
Not talking about it.
But there is one.
Yeah. I mean, I'm working very hard on it. Let's see where it goes. But I've been trying. Actually, I took a couple of wrong steps along the way. I lost time, and I've started teaching, so it's hard to balance everything. But I'm definitely writing a second. I mean, I'm writing it. I don't know if anyone will publish it, but
journalism.
Journalism. Get your act together. I mean, the thing is that it's actually been fantastic. There's been so much good reporting. And one of the things about this crisis is I'd really moved away from reading my daily newspaper, making sure I read it, because we get so much news from, on the internet. I mostly, it's like social media, Twitter, whatever. But now I'm very much back in that rhythm of, because there's all these PDFs going around. Like people keep sending me like the Wall Street Journal. I've never read the Wall Street Journal in my life. Now I quite religiously. I've never been able to afford that newspaper.
Netflix.
Lovely people.
Netflix and chill.
I haven't done that for a while. I hope to soon.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to move to, we have a few audience questions, so let's see those, right? And then we come back if we have time. So this is from Kiara. What inspired you to write Leila?
Hi, Kiara. Thank you for the question. I think I was inspired. I started writing it because, as Nandini said, there were these sort of very fundamental things that I was looking at in our cities, and they were worrying me. There was the huge class disparities, the segregation. I lived in Bombay. I was living in Bombay. My wife was, well, she's not religious, but she has a Hindu name. She's a Rana, and we went looking for an apartment once, and everyone was very willing to rent to her. But when they found out I was Muslim, they panicked, and they were like, no, you can't live here. You can't live in our building, and all of that. I was shocked because I'd never experienced something like that, and it really opened my eyes to how sharp segregation is getting in Bombay. There are parts of Bombay which, where there's food codes. You're not supposed to open a non-vegetarian restaurant in these parts. Vikram Doctor has written very well about this. It's a reality of our cities that we don't often acknowledge. There's a lot of good anthropology about it right now. I actually hadn't encountered it when I was writing my novel, but there's I think there's some academics at Brown who study just this, the kind of caste-based segregation in our cities. So it's something that I wrote about, and but yeah, I think there was a lot of things that were really troubling me about the way our cities are moving, and I try to pour it all into the book.
This is from Uday Nair. He says, surveillance is bad, no doubt, but at the same time, surveillance is required as well. So yeah, what do you have to say about that?
Well, totally, I understand that, Uday. That's very true. I mean, even if we're talking everything is some kind of surveillance, right? The state does have to keep some kind of eye on all of us, but I think there has to be a balance between what are our civil liberties, and we can't, because it's actually, there's this process is political scientists call it something called securitization. It's when something is painted as an existential threat, right? When it's painted as something that is going to devastate humanity, devastate all of us, it's going to kill us all. Once you have that as the villain, then everything is sanctioned. Then any kind of surveillance is sanctioned. I'm not saying don't surveil. I'm not saying the state shouldn't. This is the time when the state actually has to do a lot for us. This is the time when we need the state, when all the taxes we pay over the years, all of that. This is when the state, we actually do require the state at this time. But there have to also be some kind of, the balance must be maintained between what are our own rights, what are our own liberties, and how much we're willing to hand over to the state. And what something like COVID does is it pushes it very quickly into another realm. And so, it's up to us as writers, as thinkers, as whatever, to monitor it and think about it. And not allow egregious kind of violations.
This is from Asad. His question is, hi Prayaag, enjoyed watching Leila, especially because it was launched at the Royal Opera House. Is there a sequel in the works?
Of the book or the TV show or the Netflix?
I'm guessing the show.
Well, I wouldn't know. I'm definitely not writing. I didn't work on the show, so I wouldn't know. I'm not writing a sequel to the novel. Maybe 30 years later or
something. There's one more question from Sachdev Ramakrishna. He says, were you inspired by Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, Orwell's 1984, Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and A Clockwork Orange?
Of course. These are very, very inspirational novels. I loved Fahrenheit 451 when I read it. I love the way he writes. Atwood, man, it's the way she, the way she goes. I mean, I think with Atwood, I would never have had the courage to write that kind. People compare my book to Handmaid's Tale, but I find that comparison kind of strange because I would never have had the courage to write. The way she writes about the reproductive aspect of being a woman and the control over it. As a man, like I wrote in the character, in the voice of a woman, but I would never have been able to explore that in the way she does, because it was a fundamental fear that she had. You can see that that was her fear, this control of the womb, and that comes into the book. When I was imagining a woman, it was very hard for me to imagine myself in that place, but I could imagine like these societal pressures and imagine the loss of a child, though I didn't have a child at the time, but I could imagine that, I could conceive of that. But the way Atwood wrote, anyway, I mean, these are very inspirational books. Clockwork Orange. I mean, these are fantastic, fantastic books. I'm definitely a fan of all of them.
Right. Well, if more audience questions come, I'll ask, but otherwise I'll continue. Great. This is something I guess we had spoken about and we haven't been able to touch upon in the conversation. How in Leila, even what we're seeing around us right now, is this whole idea of purity and culture, right? And this whole thing about culture ke khilaf hai, and like you mentioned about, which is in the book and I guess in your own life as well, about intercaste, interreligious marriages and all the rest of it. How do you see culture? What is it to you? What does it mean?
It's a great question. This is something that a lot of people have been studying for a long time, writing about for a long time. Recently came across, I've been reading, this is the thing to do during the lockdown, is read all the books you've been putting off for years and years. And I recently started reading *Sapiens*.
Right.
And he has a really interesting point about culture. He says, biology enables and culture kind of prevents, I think what it was, culture forbids. That was the phrase. And I thought it was very interesting because he was talking actually about, this was about gender and homosexuality and, how the human body is perfectly capable of finding pleasure, sexual pleasure, all of that in a homosexual, in the homosexual act. But this is a cultural idea that this is unnatural, right? That is culture. Biology is kind of enabling us to do however we want to treat our bodies within limits, within biological limits. But it's culture that tells you, oh, this is prohibited, or this is good, or this is bad. So for me, that was a very interesting idea because in that sense, he sees culture as kind of blinkers. We have this wide field of vision, but culture suddenly puts you with these blinkers. You're like a horse and you can only look right in front of you. And I thought that was interesting because perhaps it is that, perhaps, you tend to think of culture as a positive thing, or, literary culture. And,
right, exactly.
Music culture, film culture. But, I think when we're talking at a societal level, culture can be kind of, or global level, culture can be kind of a prohibition.
Right. Sorry, there's one more question come here. This is from Kaveri Madhavan. Wow, they're suddenly coming fast and furiously. Isn't the real existential threat to India communal politics? From Kaveri Madhavan, right?
Well, that's a great question. See, thank you, Kaveri. That's really an interesting question. I do think that is a very dire existential threat. And what we're seeing with, I was the first few days of the COVID thing, when it suddenly exploded in India, I was, I remember the first 2-3 days I thought, I'm a writer, I should write about this. So I started keeping a journal and I was writing it. And then suddenly the Tablighi Jamaat cases started coming out and it expanded and it escalated and the cases were happening all over India. And it was really worrying to me. I was upset. I felt I was upset for the Muslim community of India, but also upset at these people for not, maintaining for not having the common sense not to do this, and the way they spread it, all of that, it all kind of tied in together. And I suddenly started remembering, and then I saw the news reaction to it, and it was so horrifying. You come to understand that even something like this, which is actually a universal threat that we all face in the exact same manner, even something like this becomes communalized so quickly, So, and it's happened all over the world. It's happened in Hungary. In Hungary, they're going after people. In the USA, of course, Chinese Americans are being targeted. All Asian Americans are being targeted. In India, it's become Muslims. It's Iranians, Italians. Well, no one does this to white people. Like Iranians have been targeted. I feel like there's some Italians in Goa. I might go and start harassing them. But it's just that I think that it's important to understand that once you have that, that communal atmosphere, or that huge communal, these divisions, and the media is divided in these ways. Once you have that, then also the country is divided in these ways along these fault lines. Then once you have that, even something that it kind of is directly the same threat to all of us, even that can be seen along these lines. And even this issue can be painted along Hindu versus Muslim and COVID jihad. I mean, really, you can have something like a respected journalist can come on television and say COVID jihad, and we're supposed to respect it. It's nonsense.
I think we're out of time. Sadly.
Thank you so much, Nandini. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, Prayaag. I'm glad we did this. And thank you, Sanjoy, for giving us this opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Prayaag. Thank you, Nandini. I think, everything that you both said touched so many different chords. Of course, Margaret Atwood will be on JLF Brave New World in a couple of weeks. So please catch her. And
wow.
Prayaag, good to know that you are growing older than me year on year. And you will be while I stay at 32. But it's unbelievable, what you said about, communalizing this infection. A very wealthy industrialist called me one day and said, you support these kinds of people, but don't you think what they did in Nizamuddin? And I'm like, where are you coming from, boss? And of course, I let him rant for a bit, give him a long enough rope to hang himself, and then I went for the jugular. But unfortunately, that's the situation. And the way the role that the media, unfortunately, has played in playing out this hatred is really problematic.
It really is.
And unless everybody sits together, I think media, at least media owners and senior editors, need to sit together around a table and start looking seriously at their role and the need to fact check. And of course, how they should take this forward. They will otherwise die. The media in itself is in such a difficult way.
Yeah,
but thank you both so much.
Thank you.
That was absolutely
Thank you for having us. Thank you for
taking the time out, Prayaag Akbar, Nandini Nair. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience and sending us all the questions. Please do tune in at 9 p.m. for our next session, Library of Exile with Edmund de Waal, the acclaimed and award-winning author of The Hare with the Amber Eyes. He's also one of the leading lights of the contemporary art scene. In conversation with Anchan Malhotra, he talks about his current project, the Library of Exile, that he created as a space to sit and read and be. It is about exile, says de Waal, what it means to have to move to another country to speak another language. Meanwhile, we leave you with a short extract from one of our Jaipur Music Stage archival performances, Dub Colossus in concert. Dub Colossus is the vision of Nick Page, a prolific composer, guitarist, bass player, and programmer. They may have started out as a studio-based project, but Dub Colossus have proved that they're also a rousing live band known to transport audiences to the pounding dance halls of Addis Ababa with their intriguing and exuberant mix of traditional Ethiopian sounds, sturdy reggae rhythms, and a modern dub twist. So enjoy. Remember, log back on at 9 p.m. Indian Standard Time.
Reggae is a radical music. Addis Ababa means new power, words of power. Addis Ababa. Come in a new preparation. Cause while up this year I'll be excursion. Sometimes he said